During the 1970s and 1980s, Miami became the theater of a terrifying war linked to cocaine trafficking. Several drug cartels, primarily the Medellín Cartel from Colombia, sowed terror in the streets of this city, now known as one of the most touristic destinations in the United States. To monopolize this extremely lucrative market worth billions of dollars, drug traffickers were willing to do anything. They'd spray machine gun fire in broad daylight in crowded places, killing innocent victims without a second thought. Violence was endemic in Miami during this era, and the influx of drugs, marijuana, and especially cocaine, increased spectacularly. To give you an idea of the scale, in the 1980s, Miami was recognized as the drug capital of the world. But how did this happen? How did drug traffickers from South America manage to proliferate in this region of the United States? In this video, we're going to answer those questions. We'll explore together this dark chapter of American history, both violent and surreal. The drug war in Miami during the 1980s. This period was made famous through cultural works like the TV series Miami Vice and the film Scarface and the video game Grand Theft Auto Vice City. But the real story is far more brutal than any fiction. Let's dive in. The history of drugs in Miami, and Florida more generally, goes back long before the 1970s and 80s. The inhabitants of this region have had to deal with permanent problems related to the transport of illegal goods for decades, even centuries. Due to its geographical location, Florida, more precisely South Florida, has long been attractive in several respects. Straddling the Gulf of Mexico, the Atlantic Ocean, and the Florida Straits, this state has been, over time, a strategic location for tourism, agriculture, and commerce. Its coastline, the longest in the United States, has always been an open door for smugglers who saw it as the perfect hub for their illegal enterprises. The phenomenon dates back to the era of pirates and buccaneers. But for this video, we'll limit our historical overview to the 20th century, starting with the 1920s. During the Roaring Twenties, more precisely on January 17, 1920, a new amendment came into effect in the United States. Better known as Prohibition, its goal was to ban all forms of manufacturing, selling, and consuming alcohol to combat alcoholism problems in the country. For more than 10 years, Americans were forced to do without alcoholic beverages. Obviously, some broke the rules, and one state in particular regularly showed indiscipline in this regard: Florida. There, alcohol was so abundant that the region became a true paradise for bootleggers, the name given to alcohol smugglers during Prohibition. But in addition to alcohol smuggling, Florida was also known for gambling, prostitution, violence, corruption of governing elites, and its general contempt for the law. The establishment of Al Capone, one of the most famous gangsters in history, in Miami toward the end of the 1920s, perfectly illustrates the outlaw local context of the era. At the height of Prohibition, numerous clandestine bars celebrated the vice of producing, transporting, and selling alcohol. At that time, liquor traffickers didn't hesitate to proudly display their loot. Miami was practically considered the Wild West. a place where a significant quantity of rum could circulate illicitly and where violent shootouts regularly broke out between police, gangs, and rival bands. There's an anecdote that summarizes the situation well. In April 1932, 5 Prohibition agents attempted to raid a restaurant in Miami Beach that was serving alcohol clandestinely. When they arrived, the resistance was so fierce that they were forced to barricade themselves inside the establishment and call for help. The restaurant's customers were outside, slashing their car tires. Prohibition thus became the most prolonged period of anarchy and debauchery in Florida's history. In truth, no American state snubbed it as much as Florida, a mark of distinction that would foreshadow future battles against the trade in illegal substances. Later, in 1933, after 14 years of prohibition, alcohol became legal again in the United States. At that moment, Al Capone was in prison and his criminal empire was no longer as powerful as before. However, his influence on the local smuggling market since his installation in Miami Beach in 1928 had been particularly notable. By establishing himself there, Scarface effectively changed the way the criminal world saw Florida, which allowed other gangsters to follow the same path. One of those who followed was Meyer Lansky, one of the great figures of American organized crime, notably associated with Lucky Luciano, who played a determining role in the development of the crime syndicate, the mafia of mafias at the time. His domain of predilection? Gambling. Lansky owned numerous casinos, located, for example, in Los Angeles, the Bahamas, Cuba, and Florida. He arrived in South Florida during the gambling boom of the 1930s. In this region, business was very flourishing for the mobster, until it became too risky for him to continue. Increased government surveillance in this state later forced him to diversify his business. With his gang, he turned to horse racing and sports betting, still in the state of Florida. Then, toward the end of the 1940s, he crossed the Gulf of Mexico and went to Cuba, where he was warmly welcomed by Fulgencio Batista, the Cuban president at the time. Subsequently, other mafia bosses from the north of the United States left for Florida to conduct their activities and enjoy the region's tropical climate. This trend continued in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, a period during which the Italian-American underworld was at its peak, particularly in New York with the 5 families. By the way, you should know that in the 1970s, New York was known as the most violent city in the United States. The 5 major families, Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese, effectively made terror reign in the city at that time. Fortunately, they were dismantled a decade later, and New York was able to regain its calm, which wasn't the case for other cities, like Miami, where a terrible drug war was raging. Before becoming a theater of unprecedented violence in the 1980s, Miami was a very calm place where it was pleasant to live. Before the 1970s, the period during which drug trafficking began, the city was rather poor. The skyscrapers that today make Miami beautiful didn't yet exist, and downtown was anything but dynamic. In fact, the place was populated largely by elderly people. The city was sleepy, quiet, unremarkable. Yet, in 1975, an event would change everything. At that time, several Cuban exiles lived in Miami and its surroundings due to Fidel Castro's seizure of power and the failed Bay of Pigs invasion attempt in the 1960s. A large majority of them had launched into the fishing industry and earned a very good living. Except that in 1975, an incident changed everything. On that date, Bahamian authorities banned them from fishing for lobster in Bahamian waters. Cuban fishermen, who depended mainly on this crustacean for their livelihood, found themselves unemployed overnight. To meet their needs, many turned to marijuana trafficking. And that's where the drug problems began. With their fishing boats, some of the Cuban refugees played the role of intermediary in transporting weed from Latin America. To transport this drug, they proceeded as follows. With their fast fishing boats, they loaded marijuana in bulk. Then, they transported it to the American coast in South Florida, unloaded it, and the job was done, unseen and unnoticed. Because yes, ultimately, nobody said anything. Controls on the Florida coast were non-existent, and traffickers could enter the United States like walking through an open door. Nevertheless, when marijuana seizures were made, they could be enormous. Authorities could sometimes seize boats in which 40 tons of weed were stored. Over time, marijuana began to flood Miami en masse. In fact, traffickers had so much of it that it became difficult for them to sell it all. The prices of weed therefore dropped, and another illegal substance began to emerge: cocaine. Initially, cocaine was transported in small quantities, most often in suitcases. This drug, far more expensive than marijuana, was the one that would trigger the drug war in Miami. We're in the 1970s, and local authorities had to deal with two types of trafficking at this moment. Marijuana first, which they often managed to seize in large quantities, and cocaine, which was much more difficult to get their hands on. Cocaine came mainly from Colombia, more precisely from Medellín, where several drug cartels were established. Among them was, of course, Pablo Escobar's cartel, but also that of Fabio Ochoa Restrepo, a cocaine trafficker considered at this period as one of the most powerful in the world, a sort of godfather of the cocaine trade, in short. Initially, it was Cuban organized crime that managed the cocaine market in Miami. Cubans effectively had the role of intermediary between Colombia, where coke arrived in blocks, and the United States. They were thus in contact with the Medellín cartels and smuggled the dope onto American soil. Some of these Cuban traffickers were well known, like the Falcon brothers or Sal Magluta, smugglers behind trafficking of approximately $2 billion worth of cocaine coming from Colombia. But the Colombians weren't only the producers of this drug that would change the face of Miami in the 1980s. Many of them were, like the Cubans, involved in distribution. That's when they realized something. They were abandoning a large part of their profit to people they didn't necessarily need. These people were obviously the Cubans, whom they subsequently replaced. This realization consequently allowed Colombian drug traffickers to emerge in Miami toward the end of the 1970s. One of the most influential among them was Rafael Cardona Salazar, nicknamed Rafa. With his friend and associate Max Mermelstein, a trafficker of American origin, the two of them trafficked drugs in Miami on behalf of Colombian narcos. Rafa was considered a key member of the Medellín Cartel. During his drug trafficking career, that is, in the 1970s and 80s, he was reportedly responsible for refining and shipping most of the cocaine consumed in the United States. Every kilo of coke that arrived on American territory was controlled by Rafa. Max Mermelstein worked for him. The two were, as I said, very good friends. Together, they collaborated with drug traffickers from Colombia, with the goal of transporting cocaine en masse to the United States. Among their business partners were, of course, Pablo Escobar, the Ochoa brothers, Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, and Carlos Leder. From then on, cocaine was no longer transported in simple suitcases but arrived either by plane or by boat. The more quantities increased, the more overwhelmed American authorities became. At the beginning of the activity, cocaine packages contained only 1 or 2 kilos. Then they very quickly rose to 1 ton, until reaching 10 tons. Medellín's coke thus came to Miami by smuggling, to then spread throughout the entire east of the United States. From there, millions of Americans began consuming this illicit drug. Cocaine was fashionable, and demand became insatiable. By the end of the 1970s, 5 million people were snorting, shooting, or smoking coke each month. Following this enormous influx of drugs, Miami's economy consequently skyrocketed. All the dirty money generated by cocaine trafficking was effectively laundered by narcos in legal businesses like jewelry stores or nightclubs. It was estimated that $80 billion passed annually through Miami's underground economy during this period. Miami's nightlife also experienced a real boom. Nightclubs born from drug trafficking were prominent, and drug traffickers took advantage of it to show off their Rolexes, their diamond rings, and their bottles of alcohol at exorbitant prices. Narcos were getting rich and could sometimes have $50,000 or even $100,000 in their pockets. One of these clubs, the most popular at the time, was the Mutiny. Nicknamed the Scarface Hotel, it hosted almost exclusively drug traffickers who generally met to do business. The Mutiny was a hotbed of criminality, but that didn't stop celebrities from coming there like musician Rick James, Miami Vice actor Philip Michael Thomas, or players from the Miami Dolphins, the local American football team. By the way, as a little anecdote, the Babylon Hotel from the film Scarface was actually inspired by the Mutiny. Thanks to cocaine trafficking, drug traffickers consequently became enormously wealthy. This allowed them to buy countless luxury goods like cars, Rolexes, villas, and countless real estate properties. All this was obviously made possible thanks to the corruption of police and the judicial system. Yeah, bribes during this period were frequent. Police officers, lawyers, judges, most of them were corrupt. The money was too good to resist. A cop making $30,000 a year could be offered $50,000 just to look the other way during one shipment. Many took the deal. Then came a tragedy that would plunge Miami into the most extreme violence. 1979 was the year that tipped Miami into another criminal dimension. In addition to drug trafficking, the city now had to face another type of criminality: murders. Indeed, toward the end of the 1970s, Miami saw its homicide rate increase drastically. Multiple corpses, most of the time young Hispanics, were found by police in the municipality and its surroundings. These murders, closely linked to drug trafficking, would then be the starting point of a terrible war between narcos from different cartels. Everything started on July 11th, 1979, at the Dadeland Shopping Center in Miami. That afternoon, two men from the Colombian cartel, armed with machine guns, shot down another drug trafficker and his bodyguard in a liquor store in broad daylight. During the shootout, 60 bullets in total were fired, also wounding two others. The assassins, while fleeing, had sprayed all the passers-by located nearby. A few hours later, less than a kilometer from the crime scene, their vehicle was finally found by police, who couldn't believe their eyes. The criminals had left behind a veritable war machine, a reinforced steel van, equipped with gun ports, heavy weapons, bulletproof vests, and ammunition. Upon discovering all this arsenal, law enforcement immediately understood that Miami was entering another world. Drug traffickers were far better armed than the Miami Metropolitan Police and were beginning to make the city their playground. Following this horrific incident, police nicknamed Miami's narcos the Cocaine Cowboys. What's a cocaine cowboy? It's a Colombian illegally residing in South Florida, who's either there to move drugs or to settle a score. Thus, after being the subject of national media coverage, the Dadeland shootout marked the beginning of the drug war in South Florida. Mafia-style execution subsequently intensified in the region, and the police, completely overwhelmed by the situation, unfortunately couldn't do anything. Outnumbered compared to the narcos, they seriously struggled to contain the cataclysm that was befalling the city. While the Medellín Cartel was consolidating its control over the drug trade in the region, the pace of murders accelerated. Cocaine was a violent business because it was so profitable. In fact, it was enough for one drug trafficker to suspect another of scamming him for the story to end in bloodshed. Given the profits, which generally amounted to millions of dollars, it was quite easy for gangsters to pull the trigger. This is why the number of homicides exploded in Miami in the 1980s. Rivalries between cartels were in a way the trigger of the war. Moreover, one cartel dominated the market more than the others, and this one wasn't led by a man, but by a woman, Griselda Blanco. Griselda Blanco was one of the pioneers of cocaine trafficking. Raised in the slums of Medellín, she started her criminal career as a pickpocket and bank robber before launching into drug trafficking and rising to the top of the underworld. She was one of the main leaders of cocaine trafficking in Miami in the 1980s. Blanco worked closely with the Colombian cartel to transport white powder illegally to the United States. And thanks to her, an impressive volume of drugs circulated on American soil, allowing, among other things, Pablo Escobar to develop his trafficking in the USA. Griselda Blanco was therefore the main architect of the cocaine trade between South America and Miami. Her arrival in Florida was, moreover, the catalyst of the drug war. The woman, nicknamed the Godmother of Cocaine, was indeed responsible for more than 250 murders. Yes, for Blanco, Money was more important than loyalty. She therefore had no trouble ordering assassinations to consolidate her grip on Miami. Blanco was a psychopath. She could kill her associate just as easily as her husband. The first homicide in which she was involved was that of Dadeland in July 1979, the triggering element of the drug war. Then many others followed. Many of these assassinations consisted of shooting in crowded places in broad daylight. Nobody was safe from the bullets that flew during these score settlings. Even children perished. In fact, her hitmen, and cartel executors in general, didn't care much about innocent victims. At that time, Griselda Blanco invented a new type of execution, the motorcycle assassination, a murder style that consisted of passing next to victims, spraying them with bullets, and fleeing at full speed on a motorcycle to avoid traffic. For police, the situation was therefore becoming very complicated, especially since criminals used countless false identities and pseudonyms, which made the task more difficult, particularly to find those responsible for murders. Sometimes police inspectors couldn't even identify victims, since most were undocumented. Then there was the Mariel Exodus, the most spectacular influx of migrants in American history, which brought thousands of Cuban criminals to the coasts of Florida. In 1980, Fidel Castro decided to get rid of the undesirable from his country. Counter-revolutionaries, gangsters, killers, rapists, child molesters, everything was there. From there, numerous Cuban prisoners found themselves free in the streets of Miami. In addition to drug traffickers, the city therefore had to face a new problem: the arrival of Cuba's most ruthless criminals. Yeah, the situation was only getting worse. After the Mariel Exodus in 1980, the homicide rate in Miami doubled and the crime rate increased by 89%. The city recorded more than 560 homicides and became at the same time the national murder capital. The more time passed, the more corpses piled up in morgues. Authorities, overwhelmed, were therefore forced to rent refrigerated trailer trucks to store the surplus of bodies. For many, the situation was consequently becoming unbearable. First for the police, completely overtaken by events, because in addition to being understaffed, they didn't possess heavy weapons, unlike the narcos, and sorely lacked financial means to counterattack. And of course the civilians, who unfortunately suffered the collateral damage of these score settlings between drug traffickers. Some Miami residents then began to arm themselves and fight back. Then came a moment when civilians were killing as many criminals as the police. The world was upside down. From then on, simply moving through the streets of Miami became dangerous, and nobody seemed to have the solution to counter this scourge. Until the day the government started getting involved. The incessant murders perpetrated by narcos in the streets of Miami transformed the city into a veritable battlefield. Miami's image deteriorated day by day. Tourism drastically decreased, and the media vigorously criticized the chaotic situation in the region. However, a glimmer of hope emerged when a special unit named CENTAC 26 was created. CENTAC was a joint operation between the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Metropolitan Homicide Squad, and units fighting organized crime. Its objective? Get rid of the criminals responsible for the wave of homicides that had been hitting Miami since the end of the 1970s, with Griselda Blanco being target number one. More generally, it was formed to combat the drug trafficking gangrene in the city's streets. To do this, CENTAC agents first equipped themselves better than the narcos. Usually, cartel killers always had an advantage over police officers during armed confrontations. Their favorite weapon, the MAC-10, a machine pistol capable of firing up to 16 bullets per second, largely surpassed the simple pistols of law enforcement. To correct the situation, CENTAC therefore decided to equip themselves not with submachine guns, but with machine guns. From then on, it became easier for them to fight drug traffickers. The proof: thanks to CENTAC interventions, numerous narcos were arrested. Griselda Blanco, for her part, began losing many men. Then the government entered the game, and the godmother of cocaine's empire collapsed like a house of cards. Indeed, Blanco's barbaric acts finally attracted the attention of federal authorities and the American government. Ronald Reagan, the president of the USA himself, then recognized the serious drug problem in Miami, a finding established in 1982 following the seizure of a quantity of cocaine equivalent to $100 million at the city's airport. In the wake of this enormous seizure, a task force named the South Florida Drug Task Force was created. Led by Vice President George Bush, its goal was to analyze problems and determine measures to take to fight crime in South Florida. From there, the situation changed very quickly in Miami. At this period, everyone was fed up, whether they were city residents or the government. The situation was becoming critical, and it was imperative to fight the drug scourge. Consequently, government authorities decided to employ extreme measures, bringing the cavalry to Miami. Operational forces came as reinforcement. State troops began patrolling the city's streets. The Navy lent 2 of its radar planes to fight drug trafficking, and the Army allocated some of its combat helicopters. Suffice it to say, the situation was becoming tense for drug traffickers. This is what pushed Griselda Blanco, the godmother of cocaine, to leave for California in 1984. When she left, the homicide rate and coke trafficking dropped radically in Miami. In fact, trafficking had moved to Los Angeles, where narcos had established their new headquarters. From there, South Florida began to regain its calm. All the big names involved in drug trafficking in Miami were arrested one after another, like Max Mermelstein, who would later become an informant for the government; Jorge Rivi Ayala, a formidable hitman working for Griselda Blanco; Mickey Monday, an American smuggler who transported more than 38 tons of cocaine from Colombia to the United States; John Roberts, another notorious American drug trafficker who distributed more than $2 billion worth of cocaine for the Medellín Cartel. He too would become an informant. And finally, Griselda Blanco, the most prominent drug baroness of Miami in the 1980s. Indeed, Blanco was arrested at her residence in Los Angeles on February 18, 1985. She remained in prison until 2004, then was deported from the United States to Colombia, her native country. There, in 2012, irony wanted her to be killed by an assassin on a motorcycle, the execution method she had originated. The drug war in Miami thus ended after her arrest in 1985. South Florida was finally rid of the violence and drug trafficking vermin. Miami now had to rebuild itself. After this era of violence, Miami regained a more peaceful way of life. The city effectively managed to heal its image internationally and attract tourists again. All the businesses formerly held by narcos to launder their dirty money ended up going bankrupt and closing one after another, like nightclubs, car dealerships, and jewelry stores. New opportunities were thus created for investors, and Miami's economy took off again. In the end, we can say that the drug trade saved Miami in many ways. The billions of dollars generated by cocaine indeed favored the growth of numerous infrastructures, and the skyscrapers that today make the city beautiful are the perfect example. Toward the end of the 1980s, Miami therefore became more glamorous and exotic. The city was again a destination of choice for tourists, and everything eventually returned to order over time. Well, at least in appearance, because drug trafficking was still present in the region. Certainly, violence had drastically decreased, but cocaine was still circulating. The war might have been over, but the battle continues to this day.